Emma Reynolds sat alone by the window of her two-story home just outside Boston, staring out at the quiet street that once felt like a dream come true. The autumn leaves swirled in the breeze, golden and red, dancing with a freedom she hadn't felt in years. In her hand, a glass of Merlot trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight in her chest. Behind her, the sound of Daniel's keyboard echoed from the den. Her husband had been in that same room for hours, buried in work, barely speaking, barely looking at her. She could hear the soft clink of his whiskey glass every now and then. He wasn't drunk. Not yet, but he wasn't really present either. It had been like this for months. Emma remembered a time when they couldn't keep their hands off each other. When he used to come home early just to wrap his arms around her waist in the kitchen, they'd talk about anything and everything his. Cases, her students, what movie to watch on Friday night. Now they barely spoke. The only words they exchanged were about bills, groceries, or whether the car needed gas. The silence between them had become a language of its own, loud, tense, and full of things they weren't saying. It wasn't always this way. 5 years ago, they were madly in love, got married on a cliff in Maine, waves crashing below, their vows written by hand and whispered through tears. They'd moved to the suburbs after Daniel made partner at his firm, and Emma started, teaching full-time at a local high school. They bought a beautiful house with a big backyard, the kind with fairy lights and room for summer barbecues. Everyone said they were perfect together. But life has a way of dulling the shine on even the brightest things. Somewhere between late nights at the office and lesson plans, they stopped looking at each other like lovers and started acting like roommates. Emma tried to reach out. She dressed up for dinner, wore his favorite perfume, planned small surprises. Favorite whiskey, a weekend getaway, even a handwritten note tucked into his briefcase. He barely noticed. She'd ask him how his day was. He'd grunt. She tried to kiss him one night after a glass of wine, and he pulled away, saying he was tired. She didn't try again after that night. As she sat watching the stars, she wondered if every marriage eventually reached this place, cold, numb. She thought about the way Daniel used to touch her without needing a reason. It's the way his eyes used to light up when she walked into the room. She missed the warmth, the intimacy, the feeling of being seen. And more than anything, she missed being desired. In the other room, Daniel was working on a contract negotiation, but his mind wasn't on the numbers. He'd felt the change too, but he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to reach her without admitting how badly he'd failed. So he did what most men do. He buried himself in work and pretended nothing was wrong. Emma stood up from the window and walked slowly toward the den. She hesitated in the doorway, watching the man she once called her best friend. His face was lit by the glow of the laptop, eyes narrowed, jaw tense. She opened her mouth to say something, anything but, closed it again. He didn't look up, didn't notice. She turned around, her heart aching like it hadn't in years, and went upstairs to bed, alone, that night for the first time in a long time. She let herself imagine what it would feel like to be touched again, not by Daniel, but by someone who saw her, wanted her, needed her. And in that quiet moment of longing, something inside her began to shift, something that couldn't be undone. It was a chilly Friday night in Boston when Emma finally gave in to the feeling that had been tugging at her for weeks. Quiet desperation for connection, for someone to just see her again. She told Daniel she was meeting an old friend for drinks, though there was no friend waiting. He nodded without much interest, barely looking up from his phone, as if her absence didn't matter. She stepped out wearing a soft black sweater that hugged her body just right, a touch of lipstick she hadn't worn in months, and a perfume that used to drive Daniel crazy back when he still noticed. The bar she chose was warm, low-lit, filled with the soft hum of jazz and low conversation, a place where no one knew her, where she could breathe without the weight of being a wife slowly fading in her own marriage. She took a seat near the back, nursing a glass of red wine, letting the music fill the silence inside her. That's when she noticed him, tall, rugged in a gentle kind of way, with eyes that looked like they'd seen heartbreak and still believed in beauty. He was sitting 2 tables away, alone, sipping something dark and smooth. When their eyes met, it wasn't flirtation, it was recognition. Like two people who carried the same kind of ache. He smiled, not cocky or forced, but warm, like the kind of man who actually listened when you talked. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, motioning toward the seat across from her. Emma hesitated for only a breath before nodding. "Sure." His name was Ryan Taylor, photographer who had lived in New York, now spending a few months in Boston working on a gallery exhibit. He told her about capturing people in their quietest moments, their faces when they thought no one was watching. Emma laughed at that. "Sounds like you'd be good at reading people." He looked at her then, deep and focused. "I try. And right now, I see someone who's forgotten how beautiful she is." That sentence almost shattered her. No one had spoken to her like that in years. With Daniel, even compliments felt mechanical. But Ryan's words felt real, raw, and disarming. They talked for 2 hours, maybe more, about books, music, dreams, and all the little cracks in their lives that they never talked about with anyone else. Emma found herself laughing, blushing, even as Ryan leaned in close not to touch, but to listen, to truly hear her. It felt like the kind of night that changes things. Not because anything physical happened, but because she felt something again. Something dangerous. Something alive. When he walked her to her car, the night air was sharp, but electric. He didn't ask to kiss her. He didn't need to. "Can I see you again?" He asked softly, like he already knew her answer. She hesitated. "Heart racing, maybe," she whispered, unlocking her door. As she drove home, she realized her hands were trembling not from guilt, but from everything else, the excitement, the longing, the possibility. Back in her driveway, the house looked quiet and dark. Daniel was probably asleep or still lost in a screen. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, coat still on, thinking about Ryan's eyes, his voice, the way he looked at her like she was still worth seeing. She hadn't crossed a line yet, but the truth was undeniable. She wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, she would. Daniel had always been the kind of man who carried the world on his shoulders without letting it show. Sharp suits, long hours, a mind built for strategy. He knew how to win in courtrooms, but he was slowly losing the one person who had ever made him feel like more than just a man in a suit. Lately, Emma had been glowing in a way he hadn't seen in years, laughing at texts, slipping into dresses that clung to her like she remembered what it felt like to be wanted. She was still coming home at night, still smiling when she passed. Him in the kitchen, but her eyes no longer lingered. And that's when Daniel realized she was slipping away. And the worst part? He didn't blame her. He had started the slow unraveling himself long before she ever looked at another man. A year ago. Daniel had gone on a work trip to Chicago, 3 days for meetings, too much whiskey, and a woman named Olivia who had known exactly what buttons to push. It wasn't love. It wasn't even about sex. It was about escape. A moment where he didn't have to feel the weight of failure as a husband. Emma had just miscarried 2 months before, and neither of them had been the same since. She was distant. He was angry. They stopped touching, stopped talking. They should have gone home. But instead, he let the loneliness win. One night, one mistake. He told himself it didn't mean anything. And when he returned to Boston, he buried it, locked it up tight, and tried to forget. But secrets don't stay buried. They grow roots in silence. Now, watching Emma move through the house with that soft, distant glow, he knew there was someone else, maybe not physically, but emotionally. He saw it in the way she smiled at her phone, in how she didn't wait up for him anymore, in how she no longer asked where he was going or if he'd be home for dinner. He didn't need proof. He felt it in his bones. But the truth was, he couldn't even be angry. because he had broken the vows first. One night, she was folding laundry in the living room when he finally asked, voice low, almost trembling, "Is there someone else?" She looked up, surprised but not defensive. "Why would you think that?" He shrugged, eyes fixed on a spot just past her shoulder. "Because I know what guilt looks like." Those words were heavy, sharp. Emma's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. "What do you mean?" she asked, carefully, but Daniel didn't answer. He stood, walked into the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and stared out the window into the dark. He didn't have the courage to confess not yet. But something inside him cracked that night. The walls were closing in, and he could feel the collapse coming. Emma stood frozen, holding a towel against her chest like armor. She wasn't innocent, but she hadn't crossed the line. Not yet. Still, his question echoed inside her. Is there someone else? And even if there wasn't in the physical sense, the truth was undeniable. Her heart had started to drift toward someone new. Someone who looked at her like she was still worth falling for. That night, they slept in the same bed, but didn't touch. No good nights, no turning toward each other. Just silence and the sound of two people drowning quietly beneath the weight of their own secrets. And deep in that silence, both of them knew something was coming. Something that could break everything. The truth finally came out on a cold Saturday evening, when the tension between Emma and Daniel could no longer be hidden behind quiet glances and closed doors. They had spent the day in silence, walking around each other like strangers in the same house, until Emma finally said, "We need to talk." Her voice didn't shake, but it was softer than usual, more tired than angry. Daniel looked up from the fireplace where he'd been staring at the flames for over an hour, pretending not to feel the distance growing every day. He knew what was coming. He just didn't know how much it would hurt to finally speak it out loud. They sat across from each other at the dining table, like two people negotiating the end of a contract rather than fighting for a love that used to feel like home. Daniel broke the silence first. "I need to tell you something," he said, the weight in his voice heavier than Emma had ever heard. His eyes didn't meet hers. "Last year, during that trip to Chicago, I wasn't alone. The whole time." The air between them thickened, heavy, with a kind of honesty that doesn't just sting yeet cuts. Emma sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. But inside, her chest tightened, her heart cracking open just a little more. She had wondered, she had suspected, but hearing it confirmed sent a slow ache through every part of her. "Why now?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Why tell me now?" Daniel shook his head, eyes still burning with guilt. "Because I see you disappearing, Emma. I see you, glowing again. I know there's someone else. And I couldn't keep living in a lie when I know I'm the one who let you slip away." That was when it happened. Na leaned in slowly, not angry, not cold, just heartbreakingly calm. She looked into his eyes with the kind of quiet strength that only a woman deeply hurt could carry. And then she said, it's soft, slow, and devastating. "I haven't slept with him. I wanted to. Still do." Her whisper wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be, but it hit Daniel like a lightning strike. Not because she had said she wanted someone else, but because of the way she said it. Like a truth she'd carried for too long. Like something that lived inside her now, too big to stay hidden. He stared at her, stunned. His chest rose and fell like he was struggling to breathe. Are you in love with him?" His voice cracked mid-sentence. Emma blinked slowly. "No, I don't even know if I could call it love. It was tension. Warmth. Someone who made me feel seen again." She paused, then added, "Something I haven't felt from you in a long time." Daniel sat back in his chair, the full weight of her words crashing into him. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, was painful. They both knew nothing had physically happened, but the emotional line had already been crossed. Kind of intimacy they used to share had been given, in some part, to someone else. That night, Daniel didn't sleep beside her. He took a blanket and lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly they had stopped being us. Upstairs, Emma cried quietly into her pillow, not just for the betrayal, but for the truth that they might never get back. What they lost. And yet, deep down, neither of them moved toward the door. Because sometimes love doesn't end with yelling or slammed doors. Sometimes it ends in a whisper. And that whisper changed everything. The days after Emma's whisper felt like a quiet storm passing through their home, nothing loud. No screaming, no dramatic exits, just this heavy, aching silence between two people who used to be everything to each other. Daniel moved carefully. Like every step he took around her might break something more. Emma, on the other hand, went through her routine with a numb grace teaching. Cooking, cleaning without ever really being there. Their home felt colder, like the walls had started listening to their silence and choosing sides. And yet neither of them had said the word divorce. Neither had packed a bag. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was fear. One night, a week after the confession, they found themselves alone in the kitchen after dinner. The sink was full of dishes, the air smelled like garlic and red wine, and for a second it almost felt normal. Emma was wiping the counter when Daniel spoke, his voice raw, almost broken. "Do you still love me?" She froze, her hand resting on the cloth, her breath catching. Slowly she turned to face him. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think a part of me does, but another part is ... tired of trying." Daniel walked toward her, stopping just a foot away. "I miss you," he said quietly. "I miss who we were. I miss how you used to look at me." Emma blinked fast, her throat tightening. "You stopped looking at me first." Her words hit hard, but they were true. "I know," Daniel said, his eyes lowering. "And I would take it all back if I could. Every late night, every time I made you feel alone in your own home. I didn't know how to deal with losing the baby. Instead of leaning on you, I disappeared." Emma's lips trembled. For a moment they stood in silence, their pain tangled between them like an invisible thread. And then Daniel reached out and gently touched her hand. She didn't pull away, not immediately. His touch was warm, careful, like someone afraid of breaking a porcelain figure. Slowly, his fingers slid into hers. Their eyes met. Something flickered, something buried under all the pain and silence. Then, without planning it, they kissed. It wasn't a kiss full of passion. It wasn't lust or longing. It was sadness. It was apology. It was a memory of who they used to be. When his hand moved to her waist and pulled her closer, Emma let herself lean into him, not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time in months, they were feeling something together. They ended up in the bedroom. Her clothes came off slowly, almost shyly, like rediscovering an old language. The way he touched her soft, searching, not with hunger, but with heartbreak made. Her ache. She cried quietly when he kissed her neck, kissed her tears without saying a word. It was the kind of intimacy that doesn't come from desire alone, but from two people clinging to something that might already be gone. Afterward, they lay in silence, skin against skin, but hearts still guarded. Emma stared at the ceiling, her fingers tracing slow circles on his chest. Daniel whispered, "Does this mean we're okay?" Emma didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It means we're still here. But I don't know if that's enough." He nodded, knowing she was right. You can touch someone's body without having their trust. You can sleep beside them and still feel miles apart. That night wasn't a healing. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just a moment. And sometimes, that's all two broken people have left. Asterisk's morning light poured into the bedroom like a slow truth, brushing over Emma's bare shoulder as she stared out the window, already awake long before the sun came. Daniel slept beside her, breathing softly, one arm resting near her waist, not quite touching her. Last night had been quiet, full of emotion. full of everything they hadn't said for months, but in the light of day, it didn't fix what was broken. It only reminded her how deep the cracks ran. Emma lay there, still and heavy, thinking about the version of herself that used to believe love alone could save everything. That version had died somewhere between heartbreak and silence, in all the days she waited to feel wanted again. And now she had to decide if the love that was left was enough for just a ghost of what used to be. Daniel stirred beside her, reaching for her hand without opening his eyes. His fingers brushed hers, and she didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. When he opened his eyes, she was already watching him. "Good morning," he said, his voice low, careful. She nodded gently. "Yeah, it is." They lay like that for a while, both knowing a conversation was coming. One they couldn't escape this time. Later, over coffee, sitting at the table where their marriage had once bloomed, with laughter and future plans, Emma finally spoke. "I've been thinking about Ryan," she said softly, not with guilt, but with honesty. "He reminded me of a part of myself I forgot existed." Daniel looked down, not surprised. "Did you love him?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I didn't know him well enough to call it love. But he made me feel seen, and I needed that so badly it scared me." Daniel nodded slowly, the pain in his eyes visible. "I understand," he said, "more than I want to admit." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him hold it. "Emma, I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "But I also don't want to keep you if you're not happy here. We've both hurt each other, even if we didn't mean to. We've been living in the same house, but in two different worlds." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I still love you, Daniel. That hasn't changed. But I'm tired of surviving a relationship. I want to live one. I want to feel wanted, desired, loved, not just remembered when things fall apart." He squeezed her hand, heartbreaking in silence. "So, what now?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "We let go, not because we don't care, but because we've both been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." There was no screaming, no throwing of plates. Just two grown, heart-weary people accepting the end of something they both once fought hard to build. That night, Emma packed a small bag, not in anger, but with a strange sense of peace. Daniel helped her quietly, pausing only to place her favorite book on top. She smiled through tears. "Thank you for trying." He nodded. "Thank you for staying as long as you did." As she walked out the door, she didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because sometimes real love means knowing when to stop holding on. It means choosing yourself, even when it hurts. Emma didn't run into Ryan again. Their paths had crossed for a reason, but she understood. Now that he wasn't the answer, he was the mirror, the reminder, the whisper that changed everything. And sometimes that's enough. She drove into the night with the windows down, the wind on her skin, and for the first time in years, she felt free, not healed, not whole, but finally free.